Hi, it's Robbin McMahon here. I'm the host of Parenting Our Future. And if you're listening to this podcast, I want to thank you so much for being here. I also want you to know that I am a former angry mom. I used to yell and rage and threaten and punish my kids because I wasn't getting the cooperation or the behavior that I felt I should be getting. And I struggled for many years not knowing how to change or knowing what to do differently. It wasn't until I found the world of peaceful parenting that I learned why my kids acted the way they did, and also why I was so angry and triggered. I was able to heal my anger and leave my triggers behind so that I could focus on being the calm and confident parent I always expected myself to be. I can tell you that feeling connected to your kids is the best feeling in the world. My two boys are teenagers now, and we have a strong relationship that is rooted in deep connection. And where there is connection, there's cooperation. Parenting is the most important job we do, but it's the hardest job we do. And we do it without understanding the fundamentals of the way our kids grow and develop. And we do it without knowing the way their brains work or what their behavior is actually really telling us. So it's no wonder it's so hard. And it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to say, this is harder than I thought it would be. And that's where I come in. I can help you and I can support you so that you can have the cooperation and enjoy being a parent. You can book a free call with me on my website, parentingforconnection.com. And if you want to download my free guide, How to Turn a No into Cooperation, go to triggerfreeparents.com. I really hope you enjoy the show. Thanks for listening. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Parenting Our Future. It's Robbin here. I, of course, have a wonderful guest that I cannot wait for you to meet. And I want to let you know, look, we're talking about allergies here. And did you know that 1 in 13 American kids has a food allergy? And of those kids, 1 in 5 of them has been to the ER because of their allergy within the last year. And 40% of kids with allergies have life-threatening reactions. So this is just such an important topic for us to talk about. And I have one of the foremost experts on this who has just the best platform to help you. So if you're listening, you've just gotta listen to the site that my guest is building, and it will absolutely help you. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Rania Nasis. She is a physician, an entrepreneur. She's a startup mentor who builds and advises companies that give agency to the voiceless in healthcare. Oh my goodness, like, don't you love her already just for that? So the voiceless being seniors facing social isolation, kids contending with illness, different things like that, where it's so hard to navigate when you're in that stage of life. And she is so passionate about solving healthcare problems that really others deem intractable. And in that spirit, she has founded Super Awesome Care, which is a virtual care platform for kids with food allergies and their families. So excited to talk to you. Rania, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's exciting to be here and share with your audience some information about food allergies, and just so great to meet you. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Oh, this is so great. And, I've never talked about this. I've talked about things like picky eaters and, how do you get your kids to eat different foods and more things and all the things, but I've never talked about food allergies. So I was jumping at the chance to talk to you. So can we kind of start at the beginning? This might be a dumb question, but like, what is a food allergy? What does it actually mean? So let's start there.
Yeah, I mean, not a dumb question. There's a lot of confusion around what food allergies are. And the simplest explanation is the food allergy, it's an immune response to food. Your immune system is responding to a protein in food. And so typically our immune system is there to protect us from dangerous things like bacteria, viruses, parasites. With food allergies, there's kind of a glitch. It's identified what should be a good guy, a food protein, right? We need food that's good guys. It's saying it's a bad guy, and it just basically says, okay, every time we see this, we're going to attack it. And so when it sees a food protein that a child is allergic to, it mounts this massive immune response. A whole bunch of chemicals are released. One of those being histamine that causes all sorts of different symptoms from, hives to redness to swelling of the face, difficulty breathing. It's really essentially like the immune system should see food as harmless, and it doesn't. And the reason we sort of talk about this is that it can actually be incredibly dangerous. It happens relatively quickly. And if it's not addressed, the allergic reaction, it can also lead to what's called anaphylaxis, kids can have trouble breathing, their blood pressure can drop, and it can be fatal in just rare, tragic circumstances. And so that's why we want people to take food allergies seriously. It's a real thing. It's the immune system essentially attacking food and causing this massive overreaction.
Wow. Okay. You know what? I didn't know that. I didn't know it was an immune response. But I did know that it can be life-threatening in a really serious way. And that anaphylaxis, that's why you have those EpiPens, right?
Exactly.
But is that just for anaphylaxis, or is that for all immune responses to a food allergy?
Yeah, so epinephrine is typically treated for anaphylaxis. So food reactions can vary. For some kids, it can start off mild, and so some of the symptoms could be they have hives on their face, some swelling, and in some cases, you can take antihistamines like Zyrtec or Benadryl to sort of help with the mild symptoms. But it can quickly escalate from those mild symptoms to very severe symptoms. So anaphylaxis is typically when you have reactions in two different parts of the body. So it could be difficulty breathing and hives and swelling, or, for some kids, anaphylaxis can actually present with an impending sense of doom. So imagine a toddler coming to you feeling like, oh my God, the world's ending. Like, and this actually happens where there's just sense of like, there's, devastation, they're just distraught. It can lead to confusion. And so all sorts of different symptoms. The ones we worry about the most are really the difficulty breathing, the drop in blood pressure, which can be fatal. And so the treatment when you have anaphylaxis is epinephrine. It's the EpiPens that you mentioned. And so we always say kids that have food allergies should carry around two EpiPens. So it's EpiPen, AviQ is the other brand. And the reason we say two is that sometimes, typically a first dose is enough. Sometimes it's not enough and you need a second dose. The other thing that can happen is that, in the panic, a child having a reaction, you're in the panic, you might actually use it incorrectly. We've had parents that will accidentally stab themselves instead of stabbing their kids, in that panic moment. And so you always want that backup pen, and just in rare cases, the first pen might malfunction, right? So you always want that backup pen for those, instances where you do need it. And so that's why we always say, if you have food allergies and you have a prescription for Epi, carry around two of your pens at all times.
Okay. And is it dangerous? Like it is.
I
would be the parent that would stab myself. I just want to say that I probably would. So yeah, it wouldn't hurt me or another.
It's such a safe drug. Epinephrine is adrenaline. That's all it is. So think of like when you're super excited and it's just adrenaline. It's super safe. You can't harm a kid giving it to it. You don't harm yourself stabbing it. Some doctors have stabbed themselves in front of patients to show them how safe it is. Lots of kids have accidentally stabbed themselves. Some kids, and we've heard from little boys in particular, stab themselves for fun just to see what it feels like if they have an EpiPen. But lots of parents, it's an incredibly safe drug. It's completely harmless. And so, it's not, you don't have to worry about the EpiPen. The needle does scare kids. It's a tiny needle, but it does, the idea that they're going to get a needle can be a little bit scary, but it's an incredibly safe drug, works really quickly and just really effective.
Right. And pink to the thigh, blue to the sky, right?
Is that orange? Close, so close. Oh, actually, you're in Canada. Is it different in Canada? In the US, it's orange to the thigh, blue to the sky.
Oh, okay. Okay. Maybe it is orange. See, I don't know. But okay. So this is a question I honestly don't know the answer to. Do you need a prescription to get an EpiPen, or you do? You have to have this diagnosed. Okay. So, look, as a new parent, we always have lots of different worries, and we may feel that or worry that our child does have an allergy. So where do we start? And I guess my next question is, do I worry more if I have a food allergy versus, and then I have kids? Is there a chance that they're going to have them? So essentially, is it hereditary?
There's a tiny risk that, sometimes it runs in families, but in most cases, there's no family history. It just sort of happens.
Okay.
And I will say with you do have a slightly increased risk if, say, one of the parents have it or the siblings have it. But in most cases, it's just, there's no history. It just sort of happens in the family.
Okay.
And then, typically there's no hidden food allergies. If you have a food allergy, you're going to know it, because what happens is when you give your child, let's say it's peanut that they're allergic to,
Right.
They're going to react to it. Something's going to happen. They might, have redness in their mouth. There might be some swelling. There might be some hive. And this happens every single time you give that food. And so you're going to notice it. You're going to notice some symptoms that are happening every single time that food's happening. It's typically the first time you give it. So the first time you introduce peanuts, or it could be milk, eggs, other common allergens are wheat, soy, sesame, shellfish, finfish. Any of those, the first time you give it, you're typically going to see a reaction. And that's going to, and it's often an obvious reaction. Like you can physically see something, or the child's super cranky. And again, it's every time you give the food. And so that typically is going to prompt you to go to your pediatrician and say, hey, I think something's happening. In the rare cases where, their face blows up, then you're immediately going to go to the emergency room, right? And for the first time, you're going to have time to get there. But it's going to be something you're going to notice. You're going to go to your pediatrician. And what we generally advise is we do want you to see an allergist, because it's sometimes complicated to diagnose food allergies. So we want to know that there's a history, there's a reason for us to suspect a food allergy, right? Something happened. You gave your child egg and their face got red or swelled up, or they were having difficulty breathing, or starting to make different sounds and things of that sort. We want to know that there's a reason for testing. And so then, when you get to the allergist, they can do certain tests to sort of confirm. Some of those are skin prick tests, where they'll put a tiny amount of allergen under the skin to see if it welts up, that you get a raised bump on the skin. You can also do blood tests. The gold standard for diagnosing a food allergy is basically called an oral food challenge. And that means you're going to do this in a hospital setting, or you're in the doctor's office where they have epinephrine, they're prepared to treat it. And if you suspect that there's a food allergen, you can give them a small dose of that allergen and see if there's a reaction, right? And that tells you 100% this is a food allergy.
Wow. Okay. And so there are foods that are really like the usual suspects, right? Is it safe to say there's some foods that are never a problem, or is it just a certain group of foods?
Yeah, so about 90% are caused by the top 9 allergens. And so those are milk, egg, wheat, soy, sesame, shellfish, finfish, peanuts, and tree nuts. And so those cause about 90% of food allergies. Now, you can be allergic to almost anything. They've identified about 190 foods that can cause food allergies. But those top 90 are going to cover, like I said, 90% of all food allergies. So those are sort of your usual suspects. And so the most common among kids tends to be a milk allergy. Some kids will outgrow milk allergy as they get older, but not everyone. For adults, it's typically shellfish allergies, number one. And then of the ones that we kind of think of as the most dangerous, that are often lead to anaphylaxis, or the ones you hear in the story, which are typically you're hearing about peanuts or tree nuts.
Right. Okay.
But any one of those can cause anaphylaxis.
Okay. And that's very serious, really, really serious. And so that could mean that if the egg is or milk is used to make a product as well, right? Like it's not just eating eggs or drinking milk, it's within the food too.
Exactly. So, and that's why, if you have a child with a food allergy, you have to check every single label of everything you purchase, because even a small amount, and even sometimes trace amounts. And so what we sort of try to educate parents around when they have a kid with food allergy is something called cross-contamination, where the ingredient might not actually be in the food you're giving to your child, but you may have been in, let's say you shared utensils when you were cooking. And so, imagine if you had egg and you were mixing egg with a ladle, and then you moved it to something else and that had egg residue on it, right? You can have instances of that where there's contamination happening from other things in the kitchen. And so it's often very tiny amounts that can cause an allergic reaction. So we have to be careful. And so parents have to obsessively check every single label. Luckily, the top 8 and starting next year, sesame, the top 9 have to be labeled on all food ingredients just to make sure that it's not there. But you can imagine, to a parent, it's not as simple as saying, oh, just don't give my kids eggs. You can't give my kids anything that has egg in it. And things like, egg, soy, milk, they're in, even sesame, they're in so many different things that you wouldn't think have those ingredients in them.
Completely. Yeah. And I just want to say to the parents listening, this is hard. And I get it if you're stressed. It's hard enough to be a parent, then you add in things that you didn't know you'd have to face, like allergies, or I really, my specialty is difficult kids, hard to parent kids, kids that often have ADHD or ODD. I have a child that has that and OCD. We've got lots going on, and look, it does complicate things, and it adds to fear and stress and worry, and it feels like you can't put your guard down because we're wired for survival, and this is all about survival, right? And you have the EpiPens, you may educate your child, and the world is still, there's that you just don't know, right? So you can't protect them from everything in every situation because you can't possibly think through all those, and it's exhausting if you do, right? So I just want to say to those parents, like, we feel you, and we know it's hard, and it's okay to say it's hard, I think. And then
Yeah, and if I can just interject there a little bit, and it's going to relate to any parent that's got a child that requires extra effort, like you mentioned, certain behavioral conditions as well too, which, by the way, also plays a role in food allergy. About 40% of kids with food allergies are bullied. Oftentimes need to go see a therapist. There's a lot of anxiety, as you can imagine. Fear of food pops up early, and then your people make fun of you. Why can't you eat certain things? Why are you different? Why do you have to carry around these EpiPens? There's a lot of anxiety issues that come up with kids with food allergies. So parents, in addition to sort of having to manage the food allergy, which is, when they're in your care, it's kind of easy. It's when they go to school and daycare and parties and after school events where food is just everywhere. It's just such a part of our lives. And then it's not just educating yourself. You have to educate everybody around you. You have to get them to take it seriously. And there's just so much misinformation out there. And to your point of it's extra work. There was a study that was done that actually showed if you have a child with food allergies, that's 8 extra hours of work per week that you have to do. So imagine that, you're already as a parent stressed. You don't think there's enough hours in the day. With a child with food allergies, you got to find an extra 8 hours to manage everything. And oftentimes it's cooking meals, sorting through ingredients, buying specialty foods and things of that sort.
Oh, geez. And, I don't know many people with food allergies, but I'm thinking of one family right now, and yeah, it never occurred to me, just never occurred to me. And so these poor kids can be bullied because they are different, and they can't have the cupcake when, when that person's birthday, or they get a special cupcake that doesn't look the same, or, whatever it is. But here's what I want to know too. And I was going to say, I'm sure some parents are also maybe bullied. I don't know if you want to use that word, but like, oh, Robbin, get over it. Like, she's going to be fine. Yeah. Like, don't worry so much. You worry too much. Like, I'm sure that happens too.
Oh, absolutely. And, it's important. And a lot of it just comes from, it's not sort of a meanness inherent. It's just ignorance. It's not understand. It's not, it's just not knowing, right? So for instance, we'll get a lot of parents will be told, oh, they're just a picky eater. They'll grow out of it. It's totally fine. Like, food allergies, they're just not a big deal. Or, oh, it's like everybody has food allergies today, because a lot of it is just so much misinformation out there. People don't understand what a food allergy is, or they might know someone. The one that comes up so often is like, oh yeah, I'm lactose intolerant, but I just take lactate and I'm fine. And it's like, okay, well, it's not going to kill you if you have milk, even if you don't take lactate. And a milk allergy is very different from, being lactose intolerant where you're missing an enzyme, and that sort of thing. And so there's just a lot of that. It really just comes from a place of, they don't have the right information to understand what a food allergy mom goes through on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. So here's a question that I have for you. When one of my boys was in kindergarten, he had a teacher who wanted the kids to be able to bring peanut butter to school. And so she polled all of the kids in the class, the parents, and the information that I got then. So first of all, there was nobody with a peanut allergy, and I sort of questioned her and said, yeah, but there are other kids in the school with peanut allergies. What if we bring a peanut butter sandwich, which is sort of like our sandwich of choice in my house?
Right.
So I was super happy about it. It was like, oh, that'll be easy. But like, what about the other kids? Like, so in order to have an allergic reaction, I know you just mentioned trace amounts earlier, but in order to have an allergic reaction, do you have to actually consume the food, or can you just be near it or even touch it? So I really don't know the answer to that. Please tell me.
Yeah, a great question. It's just it's a confusing one, and there's just a lot of confusion around it from parents. And so generally, you're going to have to consume it, right? It has to go into your mouth, into your gut. Now, in general, like, touching it, being near it, is not going to be so much of an issue. There's rare cases where certain things can become aerosolized. So, like on an airplane, and everybody's opening up peanuts and like potential, even though it's rare and you really need a high concentration. There are certain things, shellfish as well. Some of the particles can become aerosolized. But in general, it's very rare to have an allergic reaction because you're near it or next to it. For the most part, right? You have to consume it to have that allergic reaction. Here's the caveat when it comes to kids, though. They don't always stay to themselves, they don't always keep to themselves. And so for little kids, and a lot of times, this is actually how parents will sometimes find out their kid has an allergic reaction, is that they'll have an older sibling and their older sibling will be eating a peanut butter sandwich and then touch their younger sibling on the face that hasn't had peanut yet. And then like all of a sudden they'll have a reaction to it because, they touched it, they put it in their face, it's gotten into their mouth. And then also with like little kids, they're touching everything. And then where do hands go for little kids? It always goes in their mouth, right? Oh. And so that's a concern with, sometimes daycares and not wanting, or, early school grades and not wanting peanuts around, is that you don't, sometimes kids just aren't at the age where they understand that they can't have it. And then other kids don't know either, right? And so we've had instances of bullying where kids will throw the allergen at the kid, or smear it on them, or force them to eat it, and things of that sort. And so that's part of the challenge with like young kids, is that even though they're generally going to have to consume it to have that allergic reaction, it's just, you can't always be sure that they're not going to inadvertently consume it, or it's not going to get on their hands, or they're not going to consume it some other ways. And it's even certain times with like arts and crafts. There could be they're playing with pasta or something else, something that's got allergens in it that you don't think about. But then they're playing with their hands and they're putting their hands in their mouths, right? And that could be exposing them to the allergen. But in general, you don't have to worry about sort of having, those types of allergens near kids. It's just, in many cases, parents just prefer not to have them near because it just makes accidental exposure so much more likely.
Okay. Yeah, those are great points. Wow. I mean, again, you just don't think about those things when you don't have to. It's crazy.
Exactly.
So can you prevent allergies at all? Like, what about, when you're pregnant and, what if you eat nuts? Could that create a nut allergy? Could it make them immune to a nut allergy? Like, where is it possible to prevent them?
Yeah, it is. And we'll get into how to prevent them. I'll say in general, all the studies show it doesn't actually make a difference if you consume allergens or don't consume allergens while pregnant. It's just not conclusive one way or another. You're not going to give your kids allergies based on what you ate when you were pregnant. Okay. What we do know, there's sort of, a lot of learning that's still happening in the science. So in like the early 2000s, the guidance was, don't introduce allergens, particularly things like peanut, till the child's older, so 1 to 2 years old. And then there was this actually pivotal study done around 2015 that showed you actually have to introduce as early as possible to actually reduce the risk of childhood allergies. And so what's called early introduction. So it's basically once your child is starting to sort of grab for food, ready to go for solid foods, around 4 to 6 months, you should start introducing allergens at that time. Even some studies showing that even earlier. So starting to introduce the top 9 allergens at a young age, and that we showed that can actually reduce the risk of food allergies, particularly for kids that are high risk. And high risk kids tend to be, ones that have a family history or they have moderate to severe eczema. But in general, we also talk about, when it comes to prevention, the 5 Ds, which is, first one is diet, which I just mentioned, which is that early introduction, getting those allergens in early. And there's some brands that have come out. There's Ready Set Foods, which make it really easy. You can add essentially the allergens as a powder to your breast milk and give it to your kid. So you can take care of it without having to figure out, like, how do I feed peanut butter? How do you feed peanut butter to a 4-month-old, right? It's sticky, you'd have to water it down. So there's foods like that. Once they've sort of been introduced, there's a product I love here in the States called Mission Mighty Me Puffs, which are sort of this little peanut puffs. And so you're making sure you give your kid a bunch of these little puffs and you got peanut handled, right? You're kind of because it's not just giving it once, it's giving it, but then also maintaining that exposure to drive down the risk of developing it. And then the 4 other Ds are actually dogs. Studies have shown that if you have a dog, you have a likelihood of developing food allergies. And part of that is going to tie into the 3rd D, which is dirt, which is our immune systems learn by being exposed to like all these bad things, right? And so if the environment's too clean, that we actually are more likely to develop food allergens. So being around dogs, which are bringing in all sorts of critters and dirt and everything into the house, makes you less likely to have food allergies. And then dirt, sort of being, playing in the dirt, being around dirt, being outside, that also decreases your risk. And then the other two are sort of dry skin. We know that if you have dry skin, particularly eczema as a baby, moderate to severe eczema, you are more likely to develop food allergies. And part of that, the reason that's thought is that, the skin is essentially a barrier. Nothing's supposed to get into the skin. If anything gets into the skin, it's just a bad guy and your immune system attacks it. So what's happening with babies that have eczema is that their skin is dry. And so there might be food proteins on hands of mom, dad, grandma, and it's getting in under the skin because the skin is broken. And so the body is sort of seeing it for the first time, mounting an immune response, versus what should normally happen is that the first time you see that food should be in the gut, because the gut knows we're not going to attack food here, right? And so that's sort of one of the hypotheses around why kids with eczema are more likely to develop food allergies. And so making sure that the skin, is not dry, and then also not using harsh detergents, which also, cleansing products, even hand sanitizers, anything that's drying out the skin, you really want to avoid that, just sort of, because our skin is sort of just this natural barrier, it takes care of itself, kind of just leave it alone, and making sure you're using the right sort of lotions or emollients if baby has moderate eczema. And then the last one is actually vitamin D. We know that kids that are vitamin D deficient are more likely to have food allergies, 3 times for eggs and about 11 times more likely for peanut allergies. And they're actually more likely to have multiple food allergies if they have low vitamin D. And part of this is, vitamin D is so pivotal to our immune system. And you even found this with COVID. You probably heard everyone talking about vitamin D. If you had low vitamin D and you got COVID, you're actually more likely to have worse outcomes with COVID. So we see just what a pivotal role vitamin D plays in the immune system. And so that's just another factor.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So diet, dogs, dirt, dry skin, eczema, and vitamin D.
Yep.
I wrote down detergent, but detergent is related to dry skin. So
exactly. It's like dry skin and detergent. Yeah, it's all part of that.
That is really, really fascinating. So I had no idea that you would now start to introduce as early as possible, 4 to 6 months. And so there are some products out there to help you do that. For those of you in the States, go for it. In Canada, I don't know what we have, to be honest. I'm going to have to go have a look.
You probably have something similar. I'm sure you do.
Yeah, I'm sure. I am 100% sure we do. Okay, so one of the things I'm not clear on is food allergies versus intolerances versus sensitivities. So can we I think you've maybe touched on it a little bit here and there, but I would love a really clear definition of what each of those is. I mean, I think we know what the allergy is, but what about the intolerance and sensitivities?
Yeah, I mean, so we've covered food allergy. It's immune response to a food protein. It occurs every single time you ingest the food, right? It's not a sort of sometimes kind of thing, it's every time. And it can be life-threatening. It can lead to anaphylaxis. So with food intolerances, there's no immune response involved. It's typically something that when you eat the food that you have an intolerance to, typically you're going to get more gut system symptoms, bloating, stomach aches, diarrhea, constipation, etc. But it doesn't involve the immune system. But sometimes the symptoms can overlap, which is why people sort of confuse the two. In some cases with a food intolerance, it could be like, having a lactose intolerance. With lactose intolerance, you're missing the enzyme. And a lot of times as we get older, we lose this enzyme to break down the milk products. And so that's caused by, an intolerance to, not having that lactose anymore. And so you can take things like lactate that can help make it better, but it's not the immune system. Again, it's sort of your body's not able to break it down properly, and your gut sort of giving you all these sorts of symptoms. And like I said, because there's overlap, there's a little bit of confusion. But one of the clear things is sort of with food, it's every single time it's immune mediated. With an intolerance and with a food allergy, you're going to get the symptoms like the hives, the swelling, the other things that are sort of indicative of an allergic reaction. With a food intolerance, it's much more likely to be gut related. It's also variable. It doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes you can eat a little bit and you're fine. With a food allergy, like even a little bit can trigger a reaction, whereas intolerances aren't so sort of cut and dry all the time as well too. And they can also wax and wane over time. Like you might be intolerant for a while and then you adjust your diet and you're okay with that. And then food intolerances are never life-threatening. You never have to worry that you're going to end up in the ER or potentially you lose your life because of a food intolerance. Now, sensitivities, they're there's no agreed upon definition in the sort of among the medical community. And it's definitely not an immune response. It's sort of like this catch-all word. And in many cases, it's become more of a marketing term, right? To market tests that you can do to tell you if you're sensitive to these things. And in most cases, those tests are completely useless. They're just trying to sort of to tell you, but it's not a real thing. The immune system isn't mediated. It's not clear that there's any sort of lack of enzymes involved. It's sort of just this nebulous category. And so generally in medicine, we sort of talk about food allergies and food intolerances. And the main thing is immune system and life-threatening, and intolerances are not immune system and not life-threatening.
Okay, no, that's very clear. Okay, so it's more about the gut. So maybe you get a tummy ache, you maybe get some diarrhea or something like that, right? That's kind of what we're talking about, and it's not life-threatening. So that's really important. I think that's a really important distinction to make. So, okay, so what can we do for those of us that don't have kids with allergies? But look, if you're in a group of kids, if there's okay, so obviously I'm Canadian. I was going to say a hockey team because that's my default setting is to say hockey. But, whatever sport or activity your kids are in, how can we as parents be more inclusive of those kids with allergies? So what can we do to help those parents and those kids?
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing is include them. The greatest gift you can give to a food allergy parent and a kid is just include their kid in anything that you're doing. And the parent's going to be your biggest ally, right? So if you are having a party and there's going to be food there, invite the kid. Don't have them be the only kid that's not invited to a party because you're worried your cake isn't going to be wheat-free or milk-free or et cetera. And then talk to the parents. The parents are your best ally. They tell you ways to how to include them. So some cases, parents will offer to bring the food that their child can eat or give you suggestions on what to buy to make it easy. Or sometimes they'll say, my kid will eat before they get there. So always talk to the parent. The parent is there to help make your life easier, and they want you to include their child. And the way I talk about this, in the United States, food allergies are considered a disability. You can actually fill out paperwork to make sure your school pays extra attention to your child. And so if you had a kid that was in a wheelchair or had some other physical disability, you wouldn't exclude them, and you wouldn't let your kids bully them, and you wouldn't. And so seafood allergies is the same. You want to make sure that they're included in whatever you're doing. There's also things where, not everything has to be around food. You can do play dates that are, Legos or arts and crafts or hockey, like you said, sports, maybe playing sports or video games, things where food isn't always the center of the universe of what you're planning. And that's really it. Talk to the parents. They're there to help you out. They want you to include their kid, and they want to make it as easy as possible for you to include their kid. What we don't want happening is somebody sort of saying, and this happens so often, is like, oh, I just don't want to deal with it. It's such a burden to have a different cake and those types of things. And again, that's the worst thing you can do because these kids are already bullied. They already feel different. And that's the worst thing, to be left out of all these different parties because parents see it as a burden. And I guarantee you, if you reach out to these parents, they will bend over backwards trying to make it easy for you to include their kid. And then also, if you're going to do that party, make sure that, if it's like an ice cream party, you have some sort of ice cream-like thing that the food allergy kid can eat, right? So it's like, you don't have an ice cream social and then like hand them fruits and vegetables, right? You want to make sure that it's somewhat comparable, right? Or they're, eating an apple, broccoli, and everybody else is going for pizza. And the nice thing is that so many more people are aware of sort of, issues with food. And so there's lots of allergen-free snacks out there, lots of restaurants, places that will do sort of allergen-free food as well too. And so there's ways to work around that. It's just be open to it and be willing to work with the parents.
I love that. I think that's so great. Like, talk to the parents for sure. And I think that we need to just normalize it and just say, hey, we're doing this thing. Does anybody have any allergies? What are your concerns about the food or whatever it is, right? I think that is just a nice thing to do anyway, let's just make it a part of what we're asking anyway, right? And you're absolutely right. Like, the parents will help you. The parents will help you. And so, we're releasing this episode right around the holidays. And so can we talk just for a minute about holiday food and gatherings? Because as you know, I mean, look, we're going to be seeing people we don't normally see, eating food we don't normally eat. More food is around, all different kinds of food is around that you don't always have an opportunity to eat. And that must make those poor parents' heads spin. So what can we do, both parents that don't have kids with allergies and parents that do?
Yeah, I mean, and it goes back to really just communicating. So one of the best things you can ask is like, how do we make sure your child's fully included in this event? Whether, what are safe foods that we can have from them, and how can they, because, the severity of allergies differs. Sometimes, parents won't want any of the allergen at the party. Sometimes it's like, well, it's okay as long as my child's food is completely separate. So talk to the parents, figure out what works. It's also for family gatherings too. And what we hear from a lot of families, unfortunately, is that sometimes it's their own family that doesn't take it seriously, where they're like, oh, it's totally fine, we'll just pick it off the Thanksgiving dinner or something like that, and not realizing like, no, it's like cross-contamination and all those things that just like my child just cannot have this, and we can't risk them accidentally having this. And so it's one, just talk to the parents and believe them. Is that if they tell you this cannot be at the table or this cannot be in the food, take them at their word, right? Don't be like, well, we'll just sort of take it off their plate, right? So they won't eat it, but it'll have touched their food and things of that sort. Really just work with the parents and think of, again, like ways that you can include the child in whatever else you're doing that day, so that it's not always revolving around food. And then just, like I said, making sure there's always some way to include them. And it doesn't take as much effort as people think it does.
Yeah, that's great. And, I can really see that as being your own family, like, my mom and dad or my in-laws or whatever, like, oh, don't worry about it. Right. Like, oh, Robin's just being extra, paranoid. Right. And that's not okay. Like, you got to listen. This is life-threatening immunoresponse, mom and dad. Right.
Exactly. And, part of it is it's sort of just generational thing as well, too. Yeah. Whereas, I sort of mentioned to you before we started this, that when I was a kid, no one in my school had food allergies. I don't think anyone in my entire school, no one in my grade, I didn't know anyone with food allergies. It really wasn't until like the late 80s, early 90s, we started to really see uptick in food allergies, but also uptick in anaphylactic reactions and death from food allergies. And so if you were a kid in the 80s and 90s, you're sort of like, no one had this, wasn't a big deal. And so it's almost, and if you don't have, and it's not in your family and you haven't seen a child have a severe reaction, it's really easy to be dismissive of it. And so that's sort of part of just, because it didn't exist when we were kids, it doesn't mean it's not a real serious thing we have to pay attention to now. And so we get it all the time that there's, in-laws, there's always like a mother-in-law or one of the grandparents doesn't think it's a real thing. And the other thing that happens, which just don't ever do this, is don't blame the mom. It's sort of the sense of, well, if this didn't exist in my generation, then mom must have done something wrong. That caused this, right? That what did you not eat enough? The allergens, did you eat too many? What did you do? Like, did you breastfeed? Did you not breastfeed? And so the sense of sort of like, mom must have done something wrong to have caused this. And it's like, no, that's not what happened. It's just food allergies just happen in some kids and we have to take them seriously.
Hey, us moms, we got enough to worry about. Like, you don't need to shame me any more than I already feel, like that is not fair at all. Let me ask you though, why is there more now?
Great question. So we don't have a completely full answer to that. We don't know exactly. Part of it is the hygiene hypothesis sort of alluded to earlier of our environments are just more sterile. We're exposed to a lot less things nowadays than we were before. And it's kind of interesting. You see, as countries start to become more and more developed, their food allergies kind of shoot up, right? And some of the theories are, normally as babies, our immune systems, there's just supposed to be a gazillion things thrown at them, and the immune system's sort of busy. And so some people say, well, like now the environment's just too clean, and the immune system doesn't have enough to do. So sometimes it just starts going after things that are relatively safe. The other thing sort of goes back to that sort of dual exposure hypothesis, which is, with eczema, the skin is broken. And so the allergens are sort of getting in under the skin for the first time. And then the first time they're eating it in the gut, the immune system's already primed to attack it. And then, and there was just, we didn't fully understand what was happening with food allergies. So like in the early 2000s, we said, don't introduce till, later, a year or two after, the child's born. And that turned out to actually increase the risk of food allergies. And so we want to introduce super early. And so we're still sort of learning, our way around this. We do have a sense of how to be better at preventing it and how to treat allergies. We're still trying to get to the root cause. And this is sort of across the board. There's lots of things that we're seeing, whether it's autoimmune disorders or other conditions, that we're just sort of seeing increase over the last few decades, and we don't fully understand why.
Yeah, that's really interesting. If I think back to when I was a new mom, I was sort of afraid of everything. And the messages that I got too were to be so careful about eggs and milk and wheat and peanuts. It was like, okay, I'm going to give my child the peanut now, or the little piece of peanut butter, and like, hope and pray that there is no response. So it's scary and you're already scared, right? So I can see how
Exactly.
this, I can see how it has evolved that way for sure. So I hope this does set it back by introducing things a lot more quickly and all of that. But I don't want to let you go before we talk about super awesome care. I mean, first of all, it's a super awesome name. I love it. I say super awesome all the time. So it's like, it's the best name ever. So please tell me about your site and how it will help parents and kids with food allergies. I just think it's so great.
Oh, thank you so much. And actually, we picked the name because we figured super awesome is something kids say, and we think kids with allergies are super awesome, and we want them to get super awesome care for the whole team. And so what we're building is essentially a virtual platform where you can access top-notch allergists, nutritionists, behavioral therapists that specialize in food allergies to sort of help your family navigate this. And then we also pair every family up with a dedicated care advocate, which is basically your go-to person. Any question you have, you text them, they will get the answer to you, or they will get you to the right provider to make sure they get your questions answered. In addition, we have a platform where we'll be providing education so that you can, depending on where you are in your journey as a parent of a child with food allergy, what do you need to know? How do are you sure you know how to use your EpiPen? Can you spot a reaction? What do you do? Those types of things. It's you've got the right education. How do you read labels? In addition, we have a tool which is available on our site now, free for anyone, which is a digital food allergy card, which is essentially digitizes all your kids' important information. Currently, it's an emergency care plan. It's on a piece of paper. Usually you have to fold it up a gazillion times, put it in your kid's bag. This is a digital version. It sits in the Apple Wallet, cute photo of your kid on the front. The back is their emergency care plan, and you can share it with anyone. Really easy. You can text it to other family members, babysitters, teachers, etc. And the idea is, because with food allergy, you need the community to help you. You need everyone to know that your child has this condition, right? It's, with some illnesses, we don't want other people to necessarily know what our child's going through. We think it's private information. With food allergies, you almost want to like stamp it on your kid's head, like do not give my kids peanuts or milk or eggs, right? So this is just an easy way, like everyone you're going to interact with, you can send this card to them. That's just an easy way to tell them, these are my kids' allergies. This is what you do if something happens, and it has their emergency contact info, as well as a link to sort of watch a video on how to use the EpiPen if you do have to use it. And then we're also building out, thank you. And then we're building out a community where parents can meet with other parents, because we found the community is really strong in the food allergy world. We've got lots of Facebook groups, lots of parents meeting online. The difference is our community is moderated so that there's no misinformation. We're tagging things. We're making sure, things don't cycle out of control, and that there's no propaganda on there and no sort of people advertising different things. And so just a way to connect with parents. That's sort of a safe community where you can, because there's so much value with everything parenting related, is the ability to talk to other parents and see what they're going through. What are the tips and tricks that work for them? Because we learn so much more from other parents.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And I can see that myself in the work that I do. I work with parents in a group format. And the thing that I hear the most is it feels so good to know I'm not alone. And it does. Community is important. It's really what we're wired for too, for connection, for community. And so this is so wonderful. And so you can go to www.superawesomecare.com and it's all there for you. And I just want to thank you so much for what you're doing. And I know that as soon as you're ready, I'm going to share it with everybody that will listen to me, because I think it is so important. So important. So thank you for what you're doing. I want to just end on one quick note. It isn't Halloween, but for everybody just to know, what is the blue pumpkin, the turquoise pumpkin? What is it?
Teal pumpkin.
Close. Teal pumpkin.
Teal
Okay. Yeah. What's that about?
So Teal Pumpkin has become, it's a worldwide initiative right now. It started from a mom in Tennessee that just wanted her daughter to have a safe Halloween, because as you can imagine, Halloween's all about candy. And if you've got a child with food allergy, there's food allergens in pretty much every typical Halloween candy, right? And so what they came up with was, you get a teal pumpkin, and you can find these at lots of major retailers, from like Target to Walmart, all these large stores. Teal is the color of food allergy awareness. And basically the initiative is, get a teal pumpkin and fill it up with non-food items. So fun trinkets like, vampire fangs, mini slinkies, tattoos, things that are not food related, so that parents don't have to worry about their kids grabbing something and eating it while they're trick-or-treating. Just really fun little toys, which could be crayons, coloring books, all sorts of, you can get really creative to do this and fill it up so that kids that have food allergies can go trick-or-treating. And then when they see this teal pumpkin, they know that it's things that are safe for them. And it's, and it's typically, we've got CVS in the US that is partnering with the food allergy and research education nonprofit to make sure there's just really inexpensive little trinkets, and you can get these at your dollar store. In many cases, they're cheaper than buying candy, but it's just a way to include food allergy kids, to have it on your doorstep. And then there's also a map where you can add your address so kids can know which houses in their neighborhood actually are taking part in this. So it's just a really great way to help make kids with food allergies feel included. And Halloween, which is sort of like the quintessential kids holiday.
Yeah. I mean, who doesn't love Halloween? That's so great. I happen to live in an area that has so many kids. So that is so great. Thank you for sharing that. Let me just clarify one thing too. So we're recording this in October. It's October 7th. We just bought a box of Halloween candy that we're already eating, so we'll need to buy more. But it's nut free. So that would be safe for those kids that have nut allergies, but that doesn't mean that it's safe for kids with wheat or milk or eggs or whatever, right? So yeah, I guess that's kind of I didn't think of that before.
There's some candies that are generally going to be safe for most kids with food allergies. So things like Smarties, original Starburst, Swedish Fish, Sour Patch Kids, Skittles, Airheads. There's a brand called Yummer that makes a whole host of food allergy friendly treats. And so for some parents that want to sort of include candy, those are some of the safe options, which are sort of the brands that kids know, like everybody knows Smarties and Starburst and Sour Patch Kids and things of that sort, where you can have these sort of, allergen free food items for kids.
That's great. And
obviously not for every kid, because you can be allergic to almost anything, but for most kids, those are generally going to be safe.
So you wouldn't want to put those in the teal pumpkin. The teal pumpkin is really for stuff versus food. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, some parents that, are really good might also put some food stuff and just let the kids know that there's food things in there, or the parents if they're with them. And some will actually do both. They'll have a pumpkin with sort of trinkets and then a pumpkin with sort of, top 9 allergy free treats. So some parents, and it sort of goes back to what can we do to make kids feel more included. And so some parents, if let's say their kid has a best friend that has food allergies, they'll go out of their way to make sure that they're always included. And the more we can do, the more we can normalize it, because it's 1 in 13 kids. It's 6 million. I don't know how many in Canada, but it's got to be millions. It's 6 million in the US. It's a huge problem, right? There's lots of kids in your neighborhood that you probably just don't know have food allergies.
That's right. And you know what, just in the interest of being a good neighbor and, a parent who cares about other kids, let's do this. And so put that in your back pocket for next Halloween so that you know to do that. And Rania, thank you so much for being here. Again, it's superawesomecare.com, and you have helped me so much to understand what's going on. And I know you've helped the listeners as well. And again, for you parents that have a child with allergies, like we want you to feel seen and heard and understood. And I hope this episode helped you to do that. And I hope you feel more at home with everybody in your community with this. And I hope you get the help and support that you need. So thank you so much, Rania.
Oh, and thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this and also just spreading this message. I think what you do is fantastic. And I think it's going to be just so great. I think a lot of parents don't know about this topic, and a lot of food allergy parents are going to be so appreciative that you're covering this topic as well too. So thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this edition of my podcast, Parenting Our Future. I'm parent coach Robbin McMahon, and if you're enjoying this podcast, please share it with someone who you think might also need to hear this message. And don't forget to subscribe, and if you like my work, I'd be grateful if you gave me a 5-star rating. For those of you who like my content and want more, visit me at yellingcurebook.com to get your copy of my book and to find other resources to help you. Until next time, I am wishing you and your family peace and connection.